Welcome, folks. Welcome to you all. Um, okay, let's meditate. Maybe just to examine what you started to do when you started to meditate, what you think it means to begin to meditate. Maybe stop doing all the things you began. We can pick up certain efforts later, but for now, put all of them down. Anything you can stop doing, stop doing. It maybe feels like we have to do something, but sometimes the feeling of having to do something to make something happen is a certain lack of trust in our mind. So, what if you began to trust your mind? Began to trust the awareness that doesn't depend on your willfulness. Just enough with the suspicion of yourself, of your mind. If I give you an attentional anchor and say to attend to your breath, attend to your body, attend to soundscape. These are beautiful instructions, but it gives a lot of room for a self to be born, a self that takes my instruction and orchestrates the attentional focus. What can you trust that doesn't depend on you? Mm, the truth is, whatever depends on me, not so reliable. Maybe we could say the anchor is everywhere. In a sense, the self's job is willfulness. If we don't give the self a job, do we need a self? The self, as one of my friends said, is experienced as tension. So if we do anything, we relax. And we trust awareness to find us. We just keep letting our doingness dissolve into the openness of awareness. Maybe the only job we give ourselves is to surrender, trust. Your meditation practice doesn't need you. Maybe, maybe we can say self is death and awareness is life. How alive might we become? Okay, so this friend mentioned him before, a long time practitioner, and it's kind of like he's living in a Dharma talk. He's just, it's inspiring actually. It's like just always actively working with something in his practice. And so whenever we talk, it's like he's like midway into like a really good Dharma talk he's giving to himself, then he just starts giving it to me. And he's persuasive. And I remember one conversation, he was like, we say to everybody, let go and open to anicca, open to uncertainty, comprehend suffering, comprehend dukkha. You know, he said, it's too much. It's just too much. We need to teach pleasure. I'm in this path of pleasure right now. And he wasn't talking about like hedonism exactly, but the path is indeed about a certain kind of pleasure we call happiness, peace. There is such a thing as the wholesome, pleasant, the pleasure that leads not to more craving, but to actually to well-being, to satiety, like we're full. Craving never culminates in satiety, but in a cycle. And so um, I wanted to speak a little bit just about the kind of like some of the different species of Dharma pleasure, but More centrally, what are the functions of Dharma pleasure? What are the functions of Dharma pleasure? So the species of Dharma pleasure, many things. We could, go on forever probably, but few that come to mind for me. Just the pleasure of having a path, that there is a path that has been walked by the Dharma ancestors before us, that there's a path, actually a path, that someone has made sense of the intensity of the human condition. There's a lot of pleasure just in that. There's pleasure in having one's Dharma heart known, understood, seen, not misconstrued. We call it Sangha, the delights of spiritual friendship, Kalyanamitta. There's the pleasure of more closely aligning our deepest ethical intuitions with our behavior. And maybe there's always some gap between what we know and what we can do, what we can pull off. But Dharma practice brings us into deeper alignment between our commitments and our acts. And this feels very good. There is the pleasure of non-shame, because we've sort of worked through all the ways that the self constellates shame. We've worked through all the ways in which we're out of step with our values. We've worked through all the things that feel like they testify to something wrong with me. There's the pleasure of just, we can't be found out anymore. Can't be found out. It's not that there aren't different dimensions of our own being, but we can't, we've sort of left no stone unturned with a kind of like this fearless self-investigation. And wherever there's shame, we air it out. We realign. And there's a sense of like, can't be found out. There's the pleasure of love, all the species of love, of kindness and compassion and delight, joy, gratitude, all these, they feel so good. They're pleasure. They're pleasure. We know hatred simply does not work given the architecture of our nervous system. It cannot work. It cannot work. It's inherently painful, and love is not. There's the pleasure of concentration, the unified mind. We say samadhi. And samadhi is the kind of resolution of ambivalence, the resolution of being pulled in different directions, ambivalent. And it feels so good. Anytime, in our life, we've come to resolve some measure of ambivalence, it feels very good not to be split. It feels very good for the mind not to be split against itself, for our wanting not to be split against itself. There's the pleasure of reverence, just like we all need something to revere, And you see when people don't know what to revere, don't have something to revere, they go crazy. The highest happiness, the Buddha says, is peace. The phenomena not stimulating chitta, not stimulating heart-mind. That was just a beginning kind of catalog of Dharma, species of Dharma pleasures. Okay, but what is a different question? What's the function of pleasure? How does pleasure function on the path other than just feeling good? And that's very good. Well, one function of Dharma pleasure is simply to keep us going on the path. If it's all grind, sometimes we can stay with it for a while, but it's harder. It's harder. And so, in other words, excuse me, faith is induced by pleasure. It's this weird way in which we really deeply link pleasure and progress. And sometimes that's really wrong. But in this case, okay, yeah, fair enough. That Dharma pleasure signals something. This is a worthy trajectory. Dharma pleasure is it's rich. It's rich. It's a satisfying pleasure that doesn't generate more craving. And there we know the pleasure that kind of compounds the cycle of acquisitiveness, getting, tasting, whatever the pleasure is, the partial satisfaction and partial heartbreak of it, and the kind of disappointment, and then the doubling down and the reiteration of that cycle. Dharma pleasure is not like that. It doesn't reinforce the cycles of compulsivity, and it Dharma pleasure replaces some of the other sense pleasures we might be busy chasing. And so, yeah, generally speaking, like we continue to do activities that are rewarding. It's like operant conditioning. Because in the early parts of practice, and early parts might be many years, there's a lot of thawing of delusion. That's painful. There's a lot of purification and tumult and intensity, and there's maybe not so much Dharma pleasure, and the motivation can kind of wobble. And so the pleasure sort of helps us consolidate our motivation. When it starts to kick in, meditation starts to be actively rewarding, and it prepares us for deeper growth. Pain generally contracts the mind, pleasure broadens the mind. Pain and suffering, it narrows our attentional focus. It's like, it's almost inherently, suffering is inherently self-absorbing, you know? They're like suffering and the rigidity of self, the contraction of self, the attentional claustrophobia, those are all correlated. And so, yeah, this kind of this pleasure is about beginning to broaden the mind, broaden the field of awareness. And it's notable that that happiness, some kind of happiness, some kind of pleasantness, some kind of pleasure precedes concentration and insight. Normally we think, well, I want concentration, I want samadhi, I want insight so that I can get happy. But it's actually happiness that's the precondition for those goodnesses. Sometimes, yeah, I for sure, pain can be very good for concentration. There's nothing but the pain. And I spent a lot of time just like that in practice. But the mind fatigues if that's all, if all we ever do is see what's right in front of us, like that kind of focus, the way pain narrows the attentional bandwidth. And so that can be useful, but we also enjoy, right, as humans, as animals, looking out from altitude over distance, right? And amidst pleasure, we sort of perceive our life from a higher altitude. And the vigilance that we often live with, that dissolves. The landscape of the mind is more open. And there's a feeling of trust because we kind of just biologically trust pleasure. It signals there are no problems to be resolved. And so much of our insight on this path comes out of our kind of the noticing in the peripheral view. When we're looking for kind of goodness or understanding, for solutions right here, right in front of us, it can contract the mind, and pleasure helps widen the field. It's almost like when I'm looking very intently right here, right in front of me, where's my insight? Where's my goodness? Where's my concentration? When I'm looking in that way, there's a kind of like more rigid model of the self. And it's almost like new discoveries about who, what we are, new models of what we are need to kind of sneak up on us. And our narrow focus is a kind of reiteration of self sometimes. And with the broadening of pleasure, there's sort of like we start to learn from our peripheral vision. A lot of learning comes from there. With the deepening of pleasure, there's more room for purification, which is still always going to be a part of our path until we're done. And the path is a kind of dialectic of feeling good and feeling bad, efficient suffering, a dialectic of feeling good and feeling bad. And there's pleasure and love and refuge and delight and purity, and then there's purification. And the pleasure makes more room to digest the pain of our past, the habits that get us into trouble. The pleasure is kind of like almost like a robe that is broad enough to wrap up our pain. And so, yeah, many functions, many species of Dharma pleasure, many functions of it. And yeah, let us not be any more afraid of pleasure. Yeah, offer this for your consideration. So thank you. And we'll gather back next time, here next week. Okay, folks, you take good care, okay?